This is John Byrne, the lead pastor here at Grace Fellowship, and this is the Grace Deep Dive podcast, recorded deep in the depths of the Grace Fellowship basement here in Lakewood, Colorado. We dive a little deeper into Sunday's sermon.
I'm Johnny McCloskey, your host on the Grace Deep Dive podcast.
All right, we're glad to have you here today. John, right 2 seconds before John says, don't talk too soft coming in and don't be too loud.
Yeah, right. So he's like, you got to hit it perfect.
Yeah, was it good? Okay.
It was a hair soft. It was a hair soft.
I don't even know what that means. Yeah.
Hair soft.
All right. Well, you know, it's funny because
you guys, I invite all of you to critique Johnny. Don't critique me.
That's okay.
Just Johnny.
Coming soft, coming loud. No, not soft, not loud. Right. It's like Goldilocks.
Yeah, exactly. Just right.
Just right. Yeah. So John, yeah, so we are back on. So basically, just so people know, we were on podcasts. We were on the podcast app, and now we're not so much anymore.
Yeah, it's pretty much just YouTube and Facebook.
Facebook. So,
but if like YouTube, you can listen to like a podcast if you want, like especially if you have the premium, which is like $5 a month. If you want.
You can listen like a podcast.
You can, yeah. So you can listen to it like on my phone. I can listen to YouTube and even if it's not showing, and shut the video off and still listen. Just turn the screen off or whatever.
So I know we call it the Grace Deep Dive podcast, but technically it's probably more the Grace Deep Dive.
I don't even know anymore. I don't think there's a real, the Grace Deep Dive. Yeah,
there you go. Okay, cool. So actually we're going to deep dive something really cool this week because it's one of those topics that even as I'm writing down questions, I'm like, oh man, I am all over the place. I am confused. I think you answered this, but we'll
see if we can figure it out.
Yeah, so let's try to figure it out because we are basically in the series, Revelation series. We're on chapter 7 right now. Yeah, talking about who can stand is the title.
Yeah, which is the question at the end of chapter 6. At the end of the 6th seal is who can stand basically under God's judgment. And so that's the question. So then chapter 7 kind of answers that question. So that's why the title.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah. So but we're gonna deal with I don't want to say the whole time a lot, but I feel like we're going to deal with a lot of this 144,000, this number.
Sure.
Because a lot of people will try to say who it is, and we'll even claim that that's them.
Right.
Like we're the
Jehovah's Witness. Yep.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you a little bit when it comes to that. When I think of Jehovah's Witnesses, I think of nice young men or sometimes young women now. I guess maybe they do both.
You get both. Yep.
Yeah. So where they're kind of walking around and door knocking and all that stuff, really sweet people.
Yeah.
But then you said the cult word.
The what word?
Sunday,
cult. Yeah. Cult.
What is a cult? I mean, these are nice people. Can they still be part of a cult? Because when I think of cult, I think of like that's
crazy
scary,
weirdos or something.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's a great question, and it depends on how you're using the term, which is really important. So, in a certain sense, from like a sociological perspective, like sociologists will use the word cult just almost like religion. So everything's a cult, right?
Okay, so we're a cult to them.
To them, yeah. And sometimes even as people who study religion will use that as study history, religion and history. They'll talk about the cultic practices of a culture or something like that. That's not the same way I used the term. I use the term, so within Christianity, we'll use the term to say something that is, especially as it relates to Christianity, something where the teachings of that particular group are outside of orthodoxy, but still try to claim some sort of relationship to Christianity. And so that would be Jehovah's Witnesses. Mormons would fall into that group, and there are others, but so those would be kind of those. Or sometimes people will use the term as referring to somebody with a compound and whatever.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, and even then though, sometimes there's some kind of claim to Christianity, like this person says they're the Messiah, or
Jesus spoke to me.
Yeah, they got a special message from Jesus that is that kind of stuff. And so how I used the term was specifically referring to Jehovah's Witnesses as being a group of religious people who still claim some kind of connection to the biblical teaching or Christianity, but are outside of Christian orthodoxy and would and as a Christian, I would say in significant core issues get the teaching of Scripture very wrong. And so for Jehovah's Witnesses, they believe that Jesus is a God, but he isn't God. They deny the Trinity, the God, Father, God, Son, God, the Holy Spirit. And so Jesus is, literally a son of God, had a beginning, was, kind of a thing. He wasn't the eternal divine Son of God. Is how I often phrase it.
The Logos, right?
He wasn't well, they would say he was the Logos because John says that, but they say he's one of multiple gods. Mm-hmm. And so they're actually not monotheists, they're polytheists. And Jesus and Lucifer are brothers. He's a God.
Okay.
And Mormons have a similar thing where Jesus is one of many gods. In Mormonism, you can become a god.
Okay.
So
I've
Mormons,
tried.
you've tried. You didn't.
I got it denied.
Yeah,
for sure.
Your application got
rejected.
Rejected.
Yeah.
But so cults would have would diverge usually on either the person or work of Jesus. It's almost always related to who Jesus is and what he did. And so that's true with Jehovah's Witnesses. That's true with Mormons. Okay. That would be true with others. So they're outside of orthodoxy, but the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses teach the 144,000 specifically is Jehovah's Witnesses.
Just them.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But they're more than 144,000. So they would say 144,000 go to heaven, and then the rest of us are on paradise earth. So the second class is still pretty good, but it's not quite heaven.
Not as good. So
you're second class to the 144.
144. Okay.
Yeah, you really.
But it sounds like after reading the scripture that the 144,000 kind of are like marked, but like for whatever. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Like they go out and mark, but then you just something different even with that. Mm-hmm. So well, good. That's good to know. You talked about, as you were kind of answering that question, you mentioned orthodoxy a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know that you've mentioned that before in the sense of, and I don't know if it was on this or the deep dive, but it was just one of those things where orthodoxy is, there's a lot of things that you can believe within
orthodoxy.
Within orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. You step outside of that, then it becomes dangerous, right? Or you divide over it. Maybe,
certainly a church would, if you go outside of orthodoxy, which orthodoxy would be, I'm trying to come up with a good definition, kind of on the fly here, but would be being consistent on the core issues of the church with the overall teaching of the church. If that makes sense. So think of it like a football field or a soccer field where there's an out of bounds.
Okay.
And so orthodoxy sets the boundaries and says that, biblical teaching, these are the core issues. This is what we kind of agree on. These are the clear and core issues that Scripture teaches. Who is Jesus? Did he die on a cross? Did he rise from the grave?
It's like a statement of faith.
It's kind of like a statement of faith, but it keeps it kind of not too basic, but basic enough that it's saying these are the clear teachings of Scripture, and we need to agree on those. And orthodoxy kind of sets those boundaries. Within that, though, you can disagree on lots of different things and go, well, I'm not so sure about. Yeah. And even some of the stuff we're going to talk about today will be things we can disagree on and still be within orthodoxy. Mm. But we could, tongues or sign gifts, or we could disagree on that and still be within orthodoxy.
Yeah.
You can. And there's a variety of issues that you can kind of go, yeah, we're and there might be some disagreement on where the boundaries are, but it's not huge usually.
Do they move over time, the boundaries?
Some a little bit. Yeah, you could say that, but not like drastically. Mm. I mean, I guess you could say prior to the Reformation they were very different from, after we are children of the Reformation as kind of a Baptist church. Catholics were defined orthodoxy up until about, the 1500s. And then there was the Reformation and, Martin Luther and all those kinds of things, and challenged a core teaching of their understanding of justification, especially within the Catholic Church. And that's what the Reformation was about. And so orthodoxy, we're generally talking about what's within Protestant orthodoxy.
Okay. Gotcha. So that's kind of like our field.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, cool. Yeah. So we obviously got to be careful not to go outside of that kind of stuff. And we're even seeing, and I think you even were concerned, like, that this topic of Revelation people will create their own, field essentially. Like, so people will have a hard time with this.
Yeah. Sometimes they'll set the boundaries in inappropriate places.
Yeah.
And that's where this gets challenging.
That's why you keep saying kind of hold it loosely.
Hold it open-handedly. That doesn't mean you can't have a strong conviction. I have fairly strong convictions about what I think Scripture teaches regarding the end times, at least in certain areas. But that doesn't mean that. But I don't divide over those things. I won't divide with somebody because they have a different conviction in that area, if that makes sense. But I'm very. I might be very. I use the word convinced sometimes. I'm very convinced about this, but I'm not dogmatic about it. Does that make sense? So there might be areas where I have a strong conviction, or in the sense that I think I'm convinced this is the right way to approach it, but that doesn't mean I have to be dogmatic about it.
You should try to be convinced. You should try to become convinced.
Yeah, where you can.
Where you can.
Where you can.
It's not a bad thing.
No, it's certainly not. And it's certainly not a bad thing to have strong convictions, but I can, as far as, we'll talk about some, we're going to get into, in the next couple weeks here, we'll get into like who the locusts with the human heads and the scorpion tails, like what is that? Like we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, the helicopters.
There could be
I like to bait you, John.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But but there might be some disagreement about what those represent. That's fine. Like we don't have to agree on that. I think I'm fairly convinced of what I think those are. But again,
I'm not gonna beat somebody.
I'm not going to get upset if somebody disagrees about that at all. I'm like, it's interesting, and we can talk about it and even have a good, solid debate about it. And maybe I'll be convinced the other direction. Geez, you all right?
Yeah, well.
He's just swallowed your own spit down the wrong tube.
The worst for podcasts.
Yeah, right. We don't exactly have like a mute button.
Mute button on mine, so
yeah.
I think I'm okay. I'm surviving.
Yeah. Woo.
Man,
right.
I almost died, John. Maybe my orthodoxy is wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So anyway, so there is a difference between being convinced and being dogmatic, and we can be convinced without being dogmatic. And so some of these areas, that's what we'll do. I might be convinced, and some of them might be. I might not be as convinced, and that's fine too.
John, you mind going over the seals, a summary of the seals? Can you top of
Sure.
your head?
There's
7 of them, right?
Yeah, there's 7 of them, and we're getting into the 7th one this coming Sunday, so I won't go into that one very much.
Okay,
but
that one is judgment, though. Is that the one that's coming?
Yeah, we'll talk about it on Sunday.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, yeah. So
well, the 6th seal actually we kind of see judgment. So
okay.
So we had the first 4, which is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? And they all have kind of different aspects to them. The first one is like you have this picture of kings, people with power, wanting to rule, and this was David Mathewson a few weeks ago preached on the first 4, and his suggestion I think is interesting, and I think might very well be the right way to look at it, is that the first seal is explained by the first horse, and seal is explained by the next 3, 2, 3, and 4, and so and those talk about there being in wars and rumors of wars is like seal number 2. Seal number 3 is like economic injustice and things like that. Seal number 4, I'm trying to remember, is natural catastrophes, things like that, and those kinds of things. So, and these are all kind of, if you want to think of them like prejudgments. The scroll's not opened yet, but these are, each seal is kind of a prejudgment to the scroll being opened. And then the 5th seal, you have the martyrs, right? Those who had died because of their witness of the faith. And then they ask this question at the end of the 5th seal, how long, O Lord, till you vindicate us? And he says, well, you got to wait a little longer. Until the number of martyrs, that's not the word isn't used, but the number of those who witnessed until their death reaches the total number. That number is not given. It doesn't say how long you have to wait. It just says you got to wait a little longer, and then it's got to, God's purpose has to be accomplished in that. And it's a picture of them being sacrificed, right? Their souls are under the altar, and so it's the idea, the sacrifice, and then the blood would flow under the altar and things like that. And so that's the picture being painted, that they are the sacrifice in a lot of ways. That honors
not
God.
The sacrifice.
Not the sacrifice. They don't take the place of Jesus, or anything like that. But they do. It is a sacrifice, a living sacrifice, as it talks about in Romans chapter 12. And then you have the 6th seal, which is kind of an answer to that question as well. Hey, God is going to bring vindication. At the appropriate time, and then that's kind of described in the 6th seal. And then when we turn the page to chapter 7, you get the 144,000, which is not part of a seal. It's almost like a pause and a preparation for the last seal, the 7th seal, which happens in chapter 8.
Okay, so what is a seal exactly then?
So a seal would be, you'd have a scroll, and especially if it was like from a king or an edict or something like that, it would be sealed. And there's different explanations of how it looks. I think the most likely is that it was like some kind of twine or whatever on the outside, and it was sealed with like hot wax, and then they'd put the seal in it. That a king's ring would be the seal kind of a thing. And so it was wrapped in the twine, and then there were 7 seals on the outside, and so each seal would need to be broken before it was be. Some people have said that the seal was on the end, and that as each seal is open, a part of the scroll is open. But I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think it. Historically, I don't think you really see that anywhere. So I think that was more conjecture, probably somebody trying to explain.
Book
like the seals were the contents of the scroll, but I don't think that's the case. I think the seals were just prejudgments to what the contents of the scroll were.
Okay.
And obviously we'll break that 7th seal, and then there's gonna be content.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. When does the content come? What chapter do you know?
Well, it'll start this week.
Okay.
Chapter 8. We'll start to see that, I think.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So John, we're gonna start talking about 144,000.
Yeah.
A lot of it, and I have no kind of rhyme or reason. If you're watching too, I see a couple people watching online. At least on Facebook. I haven't checked on YouTube, but if you have any questions, please throw them out. I'm checking Facebook for sure. But yeah, so basically, 144,000. What are some of the different interpretations of who the 144,000 are and who the multitude is?
Yeah. Yeah, well, we already talked about one interpretation, right? Like from the Jehovah's Witness, and I don't think textually, I think it would be almost impossible to arrive at that conclusion. So I think one of the difficulties when people read chapter 7, the first half of the chapter roughly is it talks about these 144,000. So it talks about, hey, there's the 4 angels at the 4 corners of the earth. The wind of destruction, if you want to think of it that way, is coming, but the angels are holding the wind back. They have the power to impact the earth with this, and the reason that they're doing that is so that this 144,000 can be sealed. Is the word that's used, and so there's
kind of seal.
Yeah, not a seal like the scroll, more like a seal like, and I talked about Ezekiel chapter 9 and how Israel had rebelled against God. They were worshiping idols, right? And there's these 6 executioners that come with their execution weapons, and then somebody with a writing box, I think is how it's translated, and they mark the people that are faithful, that are disgusted by the rejection of God and the idol worship and stuff like that. And so they get marked, and so they're saved from the judgment of execution that's coming. And some people go back to the Exodus story, right? And you remember the last plague where it's where God is going to judge Egypt, and he's going to take the life of the firstborn child, the firstborn male child. Mm-hmm. And so he commands Israel what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to have a sacrifice, and part of that sacrifice is painting their door mark with the blood, mm-hmm. or the door, the side of the door with the blood above it, so that as the angel of death comes through, recognizes that family or whatever was faithful, marked, they've been marked, mm-hmm. right? And so they pass over, and that's where Jews get the Passover celebration, and so that some people will go back to that, and I think that's perfectly appropriate as well. And to see that there, and so basically what's being done is God is looking at this group of people, and he's saying, I'm going to mark them so that they are not impacted by this judgment in that way. And so that's what's kind of happening in the text. And then it's this 144,000. It's 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. So what a lot of people will do, and there's really 2 main interpretations that are usually presented. The one that I presented on Sunday, and then the other main interpretation is that these 144,000 are ethnic Jews.
You almost think they'd have to be, right?
It certainly appears that way when you kind of initially look at it at first reading, but I don't actually think that's the case.
Okay.
And I presented a lot of the reasons for that on Sunday. There's more, but a lot of those reasons. And so a lot of people will look at it and go, well, obviously those are the Jews, and it does sound like it, right? But because you go, well, there's 12,000 from each tribe, and then the question is, there becomes all kinds of questions, and there are answers to some of these. And this is one of the things where I think I'm convinced that it's not ethnic Jews, but even though I'm convinced of that, I'm not dogmatic about it. And so I hold that pretty openly.
Yeah.
And so we can have some disagreements about this, and it's all good.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, and you initially read that, and I can understand why people kind of think that initially, and because you go, well, it's listing the tribes, it's kind of specific in that way, but it's also not specific in the sense that it's just 12,000, which is a round number, and 12, you think 12 tribes of Israel, you also think of the 12 apostles, right? Like so there's this representation of at least one of those things. Obviously, people who think it's ethnic Israel would say, well, it's the 12 tribes of Israel, obviously. But then you get 12, so you got 12 tribes. Then you multiply that times 12, 144. Then you multiply that times 1,000, which is this big round number, right? It's almost it's almost like saying it's the complete group of God's people. And so it's this idea of 12 times 12 times 1,000, and so it's
the tribes of Israel.
Tribes of Israel.
It's kind of like the people of Israel type thing. Even though we're grafted into it,
right?
We're still considered.
And that's language from like Romans 9 through 11, and so people read that and go, well, obviously that's the 12 tribes. The problem with that is this, that you get in this weird thing where you actually look at the 12 tribes as they're listed there, and you don't see that list in that way anywhere else in Scripture, anywhere. Now, there isn't a standard list, right, of the 12 tribes where it's always in this order and it's always these names. But in this list, it's very different in multiple ways. Some of the names that are normally referred to are kind of left out, and then other names are used to reference those tribes, and then the order is very different as well, and you got Judah first. Judah's not listed first in any of the other examples in Scripture. Scholars pretty much unanimously agree that that's because of the preeminence of Christ, because that's the tribe that he comes from. And so you have an unusual list, an unusual order that has, not only is it in a different order, but some of the names are changed. And so you have just kind of this weird, and there's tons of ideas about all that. And I couldn't even tell you all of them off the top of my head. I can't do it. But I don't think it's especially important, other than to say there's something out of the ordinary here, but it could be anything.
Okay.
Right? So it could be lots of reasons behind it, and there's a lot of conjecture about that. So I don't want to dive too into that because I'm not convinced at all in any one of the answers.
Well, I think it's probably wise.
Right. So when people read that, so a lot of people read that and go, oh, it's a 12 tribes, and there's other questions too, like, if you look at ethnic Israel, like, we have no idea who's from what tribe anymore. Like, they're pretty much lost.
God might, but we don't.
God might. Yeah, and that would be the answer, right? Well, God knows. Yeah, okay, that's fine. And I can accept that answer.
It's good that he knows.
Yeah, and so he can bring that about in a way where we can't. And that's fine. I'm good with that.
Well, I imagine too, though, that, and I don't know if this is too far off, but I would imagine that it would have to be pure blood, right? If you're part of 140,000 is ethnic Israel, then you have to be from the tribe. You couldn't be mixed at all, I imagine. Right. I mean, that's what I'm thinking, son. I'm sure by now, there's no pure lineage anymore.
Right.
Unless they've already established who the 12,000 each tribe were.
Right. And I agree with that, and I think, but I don't want our inability to arrive at that to in any way limit what God can do. That's not my goal here. So I don't want to harp too hard on that. But I just do think, okay, well, how would we do that? I don't know. Like DNA testing. I don't know. God knows, I guess. Yeah, that's possible. So I don't want to go down that road too far, because I think God can certainly work that out. But here's the issue that I have with that particular take is I don't think the second half of chapter 7 is less Jewish than the first half, which sounds funny because as you get into the second half, it's, this multitude.
I was going to ask you, what's that?
Yeah. It's pretty much universally agreed, regardless of what you do with the first half of the text. It's pretty much universally agreed that the second half of chapter 7 is the church. It's God's church. Jews, Gentiles, it's the entire church. You've got this multitude. It says from every nation and language and all that kind of stuff. And so people look at that and they go, well, clearly that's the church. And I think that's right. Clearly it is the church. I just happen to also think that the first half of the chapter is also the church. And people...
It's not a specific number.
What do you mean?
144,000 is not, it's not specific.
I don't... Yeah, I think that is a symbolic number.
Okay.
I think the number is symbolic, which we see a lot of symbolic numbers in Revelation, right? Like the constant use of sevens to reference complete. When we get to some of the 3.5s,
some people would say that that's not a symbolic number, 7 and.
Oh no, I think almost everybody agrees that that's symbolic in some way. Even if you go, so some people will go, if we went all the way back to the letters to the 7 churches, some people will take those letters to the 7 churches and suggest that is a description that each one of those church letters is a description of a church age. Right, and so they'll say that's symbolic in that way, or they'll look at the, all the judgments. Right, we've got the seals, we've got the trumpets, which are coming up on this week, and then we got the bowls. So all of these are, sometimes they'll say different ones. Like some people have said that the seals, the 7 seals, are symbolic of the 7-year Great Tribulation, and so there's pretty much everybody agrees that there's a lot of symbolism in Revelation, and that especially when it comes to some of the numbers, they're symbolic. Not all the numbers are necessarily symbolic, but they pretty much all use symbolism in one way or another with a lot of the numbers in Revelation.
Gotcha.
And so I don't see any reason why we wouldn't do that here as well. And it's a very specific, to say that it's exactly 12,000 that's, I don't know, doesn't seem quite right. But, God can do anything. I understand that. I'm not questioning I'm just trying to understand the text based on how the text presents itself.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And so, but the other problem I have is this, that if we get to that second half of that chapter, the Jewish language doesn't go away. It's still there. We just don't recognize it quite as easily. And so when it talks about this multitude that no one can number, that's Abrahamic covenant. That's what that's referencing. That's what God promised to Abraham, is your descendants would be like the sand of like the sand, and no one can number it, or the stars and no one can count them. Right? Like that.
It'd be weird if he's like, "Hey, here's the multitude. It's actually 2,362,000. Apparently, it's counted. I'm sorry.
You're right. Yeah, so that's actually Jewish language in that second half of the chapter, but it's applying it to people from every nation and every language and every tribe, right? Like so, and then you get further into that, and then you get this idea that they're given a priestly duty. Well, non-Jews aren't priests; like they're not allowed to be priests, right? And so now this is being given to people from every nation, and so there's these priestly duties are given, and so people don't quite recognize it as quickly, but that second half of the chapter is very Jewish in the wording it uses, but it's applying it to people from every nation, every tribe, which is actually consistent with what we see in the teaching of the New Testament. And so those are some of the reasons why I don't think the 144,000 is ethnic Jews. And I think it's a reference to the whole church. And then I talked about Sunday on the hearing and the looking, right? And so and that's the other reason, because when you see that in chapter 5 with the Lion of Judah, which is Jesus,
things are the same.
Two different things that are two different descriptions applied to Jesus, and when he hears and when he looks. And then so I think
you hear the 144,000, you look and you see the multitude.
Yeah. And so there's a difference, but it's the same object, if that makes sense.
You just talked a little bit about the Levites. They were the ones who would do the priestly duties. I was confused on Sunday that you said the priestly duties were given to the multitude, which would imply the church, but that the Levites would just be doing it, or...
In the Old Testament, it was the Levites. It was a very specific tribe of Israel that was designated to. Yeah, and you get, was it 1 Peter 2, where he talks about the priesthood of the believer, and that's applied broadly too. So that's applied not just to Jews, but also the Gentiles. In 1 Peter 2. We're priesthood of the believers. That's where that comes from, and so you see that being consistent between what Peter taught in 1 Peter 2 and what
Revelation,
I think in Revelation chapter 7, and so and the same is true not in Galatians 6, in Galatians 3, in Romans 2, in Romans 9 through 11, like all of these passages apply Israelite Jewish language to the church. And you even mentioned one of them grafted in that comes from Romans 9 and 9.
Just basically saying like here's the vine of Israel or the plant of Israel.
Yeah.
You take this other vine that's not of it and you attach it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that there isn't a specific role for Israel in the end times. I'm open to that. I think, in Romans 11, I think it's verse 16, if I remember right, that Paul kind of indicates something along those lines. And so I'm going, okay, well, I'm not sure how that plays out exactly. And there's lots of ideas. Some people are very convinced about exactly how that plays out. I'm not very convinced of those things. And I hold those pretty open-handedly. But so the who is it is a debate, and that is within Orthodoxy, and so we can talk about who the 144,000 is. Is it the church? Is it ethnic Israel? There's some arguments on both sides that I think are pretty. One thing I do, and sometimes I'll do this, right? Like I'll go, I wonder if somebody asks this question, what would they do? And of course, a lot of times, they might Google it or ask Siri, which Siri will Google it, right? Yeah. So it's amazing that we can ask our phones to Google things for us, right?
It's amazing.
Yeah. And so I kind of Googled it just to see what would come up, and read a couple things, and here's where I struggle, and this is what I want to caution people with. Some people will read, and I read a couple places where it basically said, look, this is ethnic Israel, and there's no reason at all anywhere in the text, they'll use really strong language like that, to think that it's the church. And I'm like, well, I think I just demonstrated that there is reason within the text to think that it's the church. And so when people make those really strong statements, I feel like that bothers me a little bit, just because I feel like they're claiming this big broad thing, but they haven't actually taken any time to actually present the arguments from the other side in any honest way.
Yeah, at least present it. Here's the
some people might think this. We think it's more likely this. That I'm fine with that.
Yeah, you've done that today.
I'm trying to. Yeah, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm being honest about where my convictions are. But I'm very open to the possibility that and I know other people in our church have other convictions in that regard, and that's fine. I'm okay. They're my brothers. They're my sisters in Christ, and I'm just trying to do the best I can.
May
to
not
be
be
faithful
part
to
of the
the
144,000.
Yeah. Wait, no.
Well,
according to my view, they would be for sure, but exactly. According to their view, they probably wouldn't be.
Maybe. Yeah. If they go against.
Yeah. So, anyways, So that's kind of where that comes from. So that's an in-house debate, and it's like I said, I think I've demonstrated at least that there is at least some arguments within the text itself, some good ones to think that it's the church.
Okay, so let's just say, for argument's sake, that the 144,000 and the multitude are kind of the same thing. Mm-hmm. Angels are holding back wrath.
Yeah.
When is this wrath coming?
Yeah, great question.
How does this mark look? You know?
Well, the text gives us some information in that regard, and so the 144,000 are sealed to protect them when the wrath comes, and from the wrath of the Lamb, which is the language it uses at the end of chapter 6, right? And so this wrath of the Lamb is coming. That's the winds of judgment, if you want to think of it, and the four angels that are holding it off,
back, yeah.
right? Okay. And but are gonna let it go. They're gonna harm.
Gonna be part of the wrath, or are they just holding back wrath?
No, the text says they've been given authority to harm the earth and the sea.
Okay.
Right? And
so angels have.
Yes.
And the wrath and the wind also.
And so they're in control of the wind. That's how they're doing it, I guess. Okay. It's a picture, right? Sure. And so it's symbolic. It's not actually winds, in which we'll see. Revelation, some people really struggle with this.
Yeah, I struggle with it.
It's heavily symbolic, and you cannot get around it regardless of what view you take,
because you could say that wind
with your eschatology, you could, but then the text is going to talk about things like water becoming blood and all kinds of different stars falling, all kinds of different things, and so that's not wind, that's stars falling and blood and water. So, so the winds. Does that make sense? Like it has to be symbolic. Like there's no way to
try to make it literal.
There's no way to deal with the text in a literal way. In those cases, does that make sense?
Especially with angels holding back wind, like what does that look like?
Yeah, Here's my hand.
Yeah, just waiting like this. Yeah.
Silver Surfer, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That'd be really cool.
But anyways, so I just want to be careful, but that symbolism isn't a bad thing. Every single person who addresses the book of Revelation, if they are going to make sense of it at all, regardless of whether they agree with me or somebody else, has to look at some of this stuff symbolically. They have to. Mm-hmm. There's no way around it. And the text itself tells us that in a variety of places. And so... and
that's the danger of trying to make something that's symbolic literal, because you may not have the knowledge of what, even people back in the day were talking about the helicopters. These are helicopters that John was seeing. Mm-hmm. Well, he didn't have the literal thing to know what that symbol was. So we just got to be careful, because we don't literally know.
Yeah. Even if it was helicopters, it's symbolic.
Okay.
Right?
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, that's what you have to come to that conclusion. So, people, we'll talk about that maybe next week, but, whenever we get to it.
Gotcha.
But, so where were we? I
kind of the wrath.
So they were sealed. They would stand up under who'd be able to stand up under the wrath of the Lamb, and so that happened. So they're sealed, and then what's interesting is the second half of the text where we have the multitude from every tribe and nation and language. Right? It says there's that weird conversation where the elder asks John, "Who are these?" People with the white robes, they all got these white robes on, and John says, "Well, you know who they are. You know who they are." That whole stupid teenager answer, whatever. I don't know, so I'm just going to defer it back to you, so that
Why don't you just tell me?
Yeah, why don't you just tell me, right? And then the elder answers back, "Well, these are those coming out of the great tribulation, right?"
Okay.
And so you have that. So if
separate people, separate group.
I think the same group.
144,000, the multitude, and then the people in white robes, all the same.
Yeah.
Great tribulation
happens between the 144,000 and those who've come out of it.
Okay, that's where I'm getting lost a little bit. So, but we'll come back to that.
Well, think of it: 144,000 sealed so that they could stand up, so that they under the wrath of the Lamb,
which is also
which is the tribulation, right? The wrath of the Lamb is God's judgment on the world.
So the great tribulation is going to be His actual wrath.
Yeah, and that happens. Then who are these? These are the ones that come out of it.
Now, what about the people who...
And why did they come out of it? Because they were sealed?
Marked with the Lamb. But what... Are these people that are currently alive? Or are these people that are...
Like today?
Dead? Yeah. Currently, are they... Like, let's say, someone died. Let's say John Calvin.
Yeah.
Is he part of the multitude?
Well, most people would say the Great Tribulation hasn't happened yet. Okay. So
they have to be living.
I would think so, yeah.
Okay.
During the Great Tribulation, which is another question, but...
Okay.
One I don't want to answer today.
Just so I know, which question do you not want to answer?
Yeah, I don't want to get into the details of the Great Tribulation itself.
Okay.
Right now, I think we see some of that stuff coming up in some of the texts that we'll
address it a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, it sounds like what you're saying is that the 144,000 and the great multitude that will be in white robes, who have been marked by the Lamb.
Yeah. The reason that the multitude comes out is because they've been marked by the Lamb.
And then they're so those who have already saints who have already died, probably not going to be in that number. And well, it's only because they're not alive. You have to
as far as the great multitude.
Yeah, you have to live through the tribulation.
Well, I'd have to think more about that. I don't know if I can answer that right now.
Okay.
I have to really process that question. That's a longer thought process than I can do right this moment.
Fair question then.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I think here's the other thing, just to address it a little bit this way. Sometimes we ask those specific questions, and it's fine to ask them. I'm not saying we shouldn't ask them, but I'm not sure it helps a ton. Right? As far as if we come up with the answer to that, even if we get it right or wrong, I'm not sure it matters. Because I think the overall what the text, remember, this is still being written to the 7 churches in the first century, right? And so the whole thing is written to them. It's not about them necessarily, but it's written to them. So all of this stuff, all the way to the end of Revelation, makes some kind of sense to them. Mm-hmm. Even if they don't understand all the details of it, it makes some kind of sense. And so I think that's a detail that I would go, it might be an interesting question to talk about. Maybe we can come up with a good answer, but does it add to or detract from the message in chapter 7? And I don't know that it does, either one of those things. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Again, it doesn't mean we can't ask the question, and maybe in the answering of it we find out that it does add to, in some way. But I'm not sure that I see how that would be the case in this case.
Okay, cool. So I think so. As where you're at right now, it feels like the 144,000, the great multitude, definitely come out of the Great Tribulation.
The multitude comes out of the Great Tribulation. It says that in the text.
But we don't know exactly who's part of that multitude necessarily.
Well, all we know is that they have white robes, which would stand for righteousness, because it was washed in the bloods of the slain lamb. We know that because the text says that.
Okay.
And we know that it's from every tribe and nation, right? So it's not just the ones that come out of the Great Tribulation. It's certainly not just ethnic Jews. It's the church. Everybody kind of agrees with that because the text literally says those things. There's pretty much no way around that.
Okay. Is the mark? So then the mark of the Lamb, specifically from Revelation, it sounds like it's just for this group, but technically we're all who are believers have been marked with the Lamb or have been given His righteousness. Maybe just being semantic. I was just being semantical here, I think.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about this a little bit when we get further down to chapter 14, because it kind of tells us what the mark is there. Okay. And so I'll just everybody can live in suspense, or they can go jump ahead to Revelation 14 and read it. But it tells us kind of what the mark is there, and that's in contrast to the mark of the beast that it talks about also in that chapter.
Okay. So mark of the beast will be something. Mark of the Lamb, mark of the beast, sounds like it's for both tribulation, during the time of tribulation. Sounds like.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so what is the mark of the beast?
Well, I mean, there's the Antichrist, and that plays into that. Yeah.
Okay. So
let's not jump too far ahead.
Okay. You mentioned the mark of the beast this week.
I did. I mentioned
but we're not really going to go into it too much.
Well, I don't want to go into it too much. Part of the reason I mentioned it is because I think what is happening here in Revelation is that we're being set up in a good way for the introduction of the mark of the beast. But by talking about the mark of the Lamb, I think we ought to talk about both those things when we talk about one of those things. Because I don't think you can really understand one without. Well, you can maybe understand the mark of the Lamb without the mark of the beast, but I don't think you can understand the mark of the beast without the mark of the Lamb. And a lot of times when you hear people talk about the mark of the beast, they're not thinking at all about the mark of the Lamb. They're just scared that somehow they'll get the mark of the beast accidentally or something like that. And I wanted to reassure people, that's not the kind of thing you get accidentally, right? Like it's, and so, and the mark of the Lamb is the antithesis of the mark of the beast. And we're given the mark of the Lamb here and in other places in Revelation, and then we're given the mark of the beast in contrast to it as the antithesis of it.
It's kind of like thinking I think, I've already been marked by the Lamb, but I don't think technically I've been marked as this passage is referring to, because judgment's coming, so say it's great tribulation is coming, then they're going to mark those who have the Lamb. Yeah. It's like the Passover. Yeah. We know who God's people are. Yeah. They knew who God's people were, but then they went and marked. Yeah. So it's almost like, even though I've been saved by the Lamb, I've been given His righteousness, I do have the white robe technically. Yeah. I haven't officially potentially been marked yet by the Lamb.
Yeah. Some people would say you've been sealed by the Holy Spirit.
But
right?
That's happened before to people who have died.
Well, and there are others that actually understand it this way, which I think is wrong. I think it's interesting, but it's wrong. Well, I don't want to say it's wrong. I think it's interesting, but I don't think the text supports going this far with the conclusion. We'll just put it that way. I think it's a better. So some people will look at the mark of the beast. They go, well, it's baptism, or the mark of the Lamb, and they go, it's baptism. And I don't think the support. I don't think the text goes there. I suppose it could be right, but I just think it's a pretty big leap from the text to that conclusion, I think. But there are people who believe that.
Okay, cool. So the mark of the beast isn't a microchip? No, is it? Or is it not?
I don't. Well, it's on your forehead or hand, whatever it is. We're getting ahead a little bit here, but let's wait. Yeah, let's wait, because I think we'll talk about it, and I want people to keep listening. Yeah, we'll talk about some of it. Yeah,
the Great Tribulation. Is there anything you want to add now, or I was going to ask you about it, but it sounds like
all it says is the Great Tribulation in this one. These are the people who've come out of it. That's really all it says. Okay. I do think there's some interesting things about the Great Tribulation that are mentioned or that are not mentioned in Revelation. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. Maybe not today.
Okay. So it sounds like during the Great Tribulation that is to come, that there will be believers here because if they're sealed and protected.
I think so.
Yeah, because the wrath is going to be poured out, but they're not going to be affected. Now, does that mean the wrath of, obviously they're protected from the wrath of the Lamb.
Right.
But are they protected from the wrath of man?
No.
Oh, maybe not.
No. I don't think we see that at all. I mean, the martyrs, they get martyred, right? So I don't think we see that at all. And I think that's a great clarification, right? There are judgments on the earth, for instance, that we're going to see this next week, and then and water and things like that. And will we be affected by those? I think yeah. But direct judgment on, we are protected from the wrath of the Lamb in direct judgment upon those upon the church or upon the believer, that we don't experience that because we've been marked. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we will. That doesn't mean there can't be martyrs, that we can't experience persecution, that we can't. As a matter of fact, all those things are promised to us pretty much. Sure. Like there will be persecution,
but not necessarily in the tribulation.
But it is not judgment from God.
That's
because we've been given the white robes. We've been washed clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
We stand righteous. Those white robes represent righteousness, standing before God, washed by the blood of the slain lamb.
Yeah.
And so and just to tip my hat, and probably lots of people probably figure this out, but I don't know if I've blatantly said it or not. I don't think that there is a pre-tribulation rapture.
Mm-hmm.
I think
you've kind of said it before.
Have I? Yeah. So for me, that means I think.
Sounds like the end.
Everybody who follows Jesus, when we'll go through the tribulation, like there's nobody escapes from that, from the Great Tribulation by a pre-trib rapture. And I'm very familiar with 1 Thessalonians 4 and all that kind of stuff. I understand those things. I preached on that a number of years ago, and I think it is that is describing the second coming of Christ, and I've some reasons for that probably won't go into today, but so I think Jesus comes, he returns after the tribulation. That's what I think. And I think that's what the text teaches. Mm-hmm. So
I mean,
I would prefer to be wrong, by the way.
Sure, of course.
just so we're clear, like I'd like to be wrong about that.
I mean, I think that's the thing. I think as Christians, sometimes we get almost, it's almost like, I'm not saying that we focus more importantly on what wrath we're being saved from. Yeah. Because maybe we just assume, we take it for granted we're not receiving the wrath of God, so we're good, or the wrath of the Lamb. Yeah. So we're like, cool, that's great. Now, what's the next wrath? Oh, can I get saved from that? That'd be great. I think sometimes we become so focused on just the world's wrath and the wrath of man that we're kind of, I don't know. We just focus so much on that. Yeah. And we want to avoid that one too. Right. And reality is if you're going to be saved from any wrath, you choose. That one. Yeah. And then the other one is like, well, that's not going to be fun potentially, or maybe it's not a good thing, but it's not something. I mean, you're going to worry about it. I mean, it's just human nature. So yeah. So cool. Yeah, so I was just kind of wrap it up. I mean, I had 144,000 questions for you. Yeah. Where I asked 8, so we got a ways to go here. But no,
buckle in. It's gonna be a long week.
We're starting. Oh, you mean a long couple? Yeah, we're just gonna go for it. But no, I think I was kind of wrapping it up. I think the tribulation is kind of what I'm thinking about next, and whatnot. So
I literally have, if I were to show you a picture of my page of chapter 7, and chapter 7's all on one page in my Bible. I literally have, I wrote between the first half and the second half, I wrote the Great Tribulation happens here. That just because that's what I think the text kind of presents.
And that's next week?
That's this week. That's this last week.
Oh, the Great Tribulation. Okay.
Yeah.
But not in detail.
Here's the thing I want to do, and just so you guys can understand. I want to really allow the text to speak without trying to take my system or any system and inputting into the text. I want my goal is to allow the text to speak, and then out of that we derive our understanding, our theology, and things like that. And so I'm not going to talk about the tribulation, generally speaking, in places where the tribulation is not mentioned, and it was mentioned this last week, and that's why we talked about it.
So it sounds like we're just kind of like, as we kind of try to make sense of Revelation.
Yeah. I'm not saying I'll never bring it up if it's not mentioned. I'm just saying I'm trying to really stay with the text and allow the text to speak.
What we really need to focus though is being sealed and marked.
Yeah, man. By
the Lamb.
Yeah.
That's it, and not necessarily worry. That should be our first concern.
Yeah, that's number one concern is let's be marked by the Lamb.
Yeah.
And sealed by sealed. It's the seal, the mark of the Lamb. And then the mark of the beast. If we have the mark of the Lamb, we're not gonna have the mark of the beast.
Yeah. Even if you get. Yeah. A microchip.
Even if you get a microchip.
Yeah.
I'm not saying go get microchips. I don't know. I think we always want to figure it out, right?
Here's my 2 cents on the microchip thing. I think the reason why, it seems like we don't want to get it is because if you want to persecute somebody, you scan them and you go.
I have all kinds of reasons not wanting a microchip in my body.
Yeah.
None of them are the mark of the beast.
Exactly. You think, that's the easiest way to cut off commerce. Like if you're scanning everything, that's kind of makes sense to me. Like, hey, you go to the grocery store.
Yeah. We'll get there. That's chapter 14.
Oh, okay. Flag the chip. They're going to flag my chip. My account has been dried up. So let's go ahead and. Did you have any resources this week? I know it's
not
same
additional, same ones as before. I don't want to overwhelm everybody, but there's some good ones we've mentioned before, and I think if you picked up any of those, you're probably doing really well and tracking and working through some of that stuff. So
cool. So then, what's the big idea this week, John?
Oh man, the big idea is only those who are washed by the blood of the Lamb are protected from the wrath of the Lamb.
Thank you for joining us on the Grace Deep Dive Podcast, where we believe in real grace for real living. We'll see you next week.